Semeno. Olha, deixa ali. Mostra já.
उन्होंने आपको अपनी दिल में बैठा
My greetings to Geshe-las, or Tibetan scholars, regarding today's program. To be bold or audacious, since the Buddha taught the view of selflessness, it's been 2,600 years, and particularly Master Nagarjuna and his disciples, since they established this view thoroughly. And this view, regarding this view, today in the 20th, in the modern age, when people are checked and researched through scientific research, the reality, people are finding that there is nothing objectively there, and so this is amazing. His Holiness is asking about the translators, and so a philosophical view that evolved 2,600 years ago is becoming compatible with the findings of modern science through technological advancements, and therefore the modern scientific finding and the philosophical view that evolved 2,600 years ago we are having this conference for the first time in 2,600 years, perhaps, between quantum physics and Buddhist philosophical views. And therefore, the Geshe-las must muster up your courage and give your talks, but you should not be stick to orthodoxy and just repeat what we have been saying traditionally. But you should not also be too overconfident and say that the modern knowledge is not really valuable. So how many, someone is asking how many of you, the geshes, the monks, are actually doing philosophical study?
Hello, good morning.
And then His Holiness had asked some Rinpoches to come. And one of the Rinpoches is hiding somewhere, as he usually does, His Holiness says.
How are you? Good morning.
I was there.
What do you think this stick?
This is an Italian Amala, His Holiness knows well.
A very good morning to everyone. On behalf of Jawaharlal Nehru University and the Dalai Lama Trust, I would like to extend a warm welcome to His Holiness the Dalai Lama the Vice-chancellor of Jawaharlal Nehru University, Professor Sopori, the rector of JNU, Professor Prasenjit Sen, esteemed speakers joining us, honored guests from outside, respected professors, and dear students from the university to this conference on quantum physics and Madhyamaka philosophical view. Now, without me taking much time, I would humbly request Professor Prasenjit Sen, rector of JNU, to kindly give an introduction about the conference. Sir.
His Holiness, the Dalai Lama, Vice-chancellor Professor Sudhir Kumar Sopori, distinguished speakers and discussants, distinguished guests, distinguished scholars, participants in this conference, students, ladies and gentlemen. This is a unique conference, and I believe it's the first time that it is being held in an academic institution where a confluence of quantum physics and Buddhist Madhyamaka philosophy is taking place for the first time. It's relevant that quantum physics be discussed because quantum mechanics has become very close to society. With the advent of nanomaterials, which I think is known to everybody, nanomaterials are today there in face creams, in dental implants, and it's part of our society. So quantum physics is important, and I'm really excited about this conference, which brings together philosophy and science. We have amongst us from India as well as from abroad people who are real experts in this subject. When you make a confluence of two apparently diverse thoughts, it's important to have experts from both these diverse thoughts, and by design or by accident, this has happened to this conference. So we have great experts in quantum mechanics, great experts who have dealt in their lives on the mathematical foundations of quantum mechanics. We have experts who have worked in the confluence of these two philosophies, and we have Buddhist scholars. With this introduction, I would like to draw your attention to these 8 mud tumblers. These are tumblers which are used in India to make, for example, yogurt in the villages. So if you turn it around, they're actually tumblers. So they make yogurt in these villages. These are also tumblers which in villages and towns, people keep water and let birds and small animals drink from this. So these tumblers actually represent life and life processes. Now, having turned it around like this, it also represents the Buddhist stupa. For example, the one in Sanchi and the one in Mohenjo-daro, which is on the western bank of the river Indus. So what my student friends have done is to actually draw out the 8 auspicious signs of Buddhism. So we have the precious umbrella, which is the representation of Buddha's image, the head. We have victory banner, representation of Buddha's image, the body. We have right coiled white conch, representation of Buddha's image, voice. We have auspicious drawing, which is the representation of Buddha's image, mind. We have golden fish, which is the representation of Buddha's image, eyes. And we have lotus flower, which is the representation of Buddha's image, tongue. And we have the vase of treasure or vase of treasure, as spoken in the United States, which is the representation of Buddha's image, neck. And we have the dharma wheel, which is the representation of Buddha's image, feet. So these have all been done by the students. And I think with those few words, I would like to apologize for the inconvenience that's being caused because of these lot of wires hanging around here. This was required because we wanted to transform a normal auditorium into one which will enable the crowd, the audience, to participate in this discussion. So as a result, this stage where experts will be speaking and discussing, the crowd can also, the audience can also participate. So please excuse us for the inconveniences, and I wish your presence here and the conference the very best. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for the excellent introduction. And now I humbly request the Vice-chancellor of JNU, Professor Sudhir Kumar Sopori, to deliver his welcome speech. The floor is yours, sir. As well as with regard to translation, please tune into 93 FM for English and 89.5 FM for Chinese, as well as 93 FM for Tibetan. Thank you.
His Holiness Dalai Lama, esteemed speakers and participants, ladies and gentlemen, we welcome all of you to Jawaharlal Nehru University and to this important meeting on quantum physics and Madhyamik philosophical view. We are in fact grateful to His Highness. He conceptualized this meeting and also decided to hold this meeting at this university. We're extremely thankful to you for this, having accepted to be here this morning. In fact, last year, His Holiness gave the Nehru Memorial Lecture at Jawaharlal Nehru University. And that we had to conduct outside because the crowd was so much. I think we had almost 2,000 to 3,000 people there. And after the end of the lecture, His Holiness told me that he would like to hold another meeting here on this specific topic, and therefore we got together and conceptualized this one. Now these two topics, Madhyamaka philosophy and quantum physics, personally I'm ignorant on both these sides of this one. Being a biologist, working as a scientist, I have very little knowledge, and therefore I would be happy that after listening to the speakers, I get some idea into these views. Now, being a scientist, many of us are engaged in our own field of studies. Not only scientists, but also those working in the area of humanities and philosophies. One of the major questions which comes to our mind time and again is the nature and truth of life and nature and truth of the universe around us. Biologists are still struggling to even answer the basic question of the origin of life. We had Darwin proposed his theory of evolution, how different species, be it plants or animals, which have come up on this planet. But to think of it, we still do not know how everything originated at the beginning. And that is a major question which all of us are facing. Sometimes, in one of the meetings where I was there, I had some interest in our own Kashmir philosophy. And somebody asked me that, being a scientist, why are you talking about a philosophy or a religion on the other hand? How do you merge these two things together? The answer was, and this I had learned from my guru in Kashmir, and he said scientists and all those around here, they are looking at the creation around us. They're trying to understand the creation. But he was a saint there, Kashmir Shaivism, one of the philosophers there. He said, we look at the creator. So you look at the creation, we look at the creator who created this creation. So this is the dilemma on which we all have been worried about. And so each one of us have developed our own concepts, our own theories, our own philosophies to answer some of these basic fundamental questions in life. And one of the greatest theories which you're going to discuss today is, of course, Madhyamaka, how it is going to explain some of the fundamentals of life processes. Madhyamaka means basically the center. That's the meaning of it, center. Now, sometimes I wonder which center we are talking about. What is that center which one is looking at? In fact, in Kashmir Shaivism also we have the theory of centrism. And they are looking at like whether you can reach the center. Now we have to define what that center is. And they think that there can be many different centers where if you want to reach that center, you get into the vacuum. That's the where you reach. And from there, the consciousness arises, and then you can look at the world very differently. Now, what are those centers of centrism which we are talking about? And this in our philosophy, they basically see when you in the morning, for example, practice the inhaling and exhaling of breath, there is a point which comes when you have inhaled, then there is a stoppage there for millions of seconds. Some seconds are there, not a second, but maybe a millionth of a second, and then you exhale. Now that point which is between exhaling and inhaling, that is the center which you have to caught and get stuck in there. And these are the kinds of things they say that when you are stuck on that particular specific point, then you achieve what we call as the sadhana, or you achieve a higher state of consciousness. And once you achieve that state of consciousness, or that state of that centrism, in fact, you get a feeling of, this is what Madhyamaka probably calls about also the point of emptiness. So you feel that you have reached a point of emptiness, and there one realizes that from that point of emptiness, you actually can look at the infinity. So you're looking at emptiness to infinity, getting into the state of consciousness, and from there you get the thought processes which come up, the creation of thoughts and creation of the world around us. So these are the kind of different philosophies which people are talking about. And recently I was looking into one of the book, it's an art written by Robert Lenzer. This is called Biocentrism. We had been talking about the physical world, which then leads into our life processes. But this theory is a little different. He looks at biology as the central point, and rest of the things follows from that biology. So according to him, consciousness creates material universe, and they say intelligence existed prior to matter. Now this is a question of whether matter existed first and then came intelligence and consciousness, or according to him, they say the consciousness and intelligence existed even prior to the matter, and that really led to the creation of this matter. There can be many thoughts and different hypotheses, theories about these things. But today, we are going to have some of the best minds which have come here to talk about quantum physics, Madhyamaka, the philosophy, relationships, and trying to look at and answer the questions to basic fundamentals of life. While each one of us may be speaking, we are all, as in academicians, we are all bound by our boundaries. We look within a small time frame, we look within a small area of studies in which we have worked, and probably all those talks may be limited to in some extent. It's only personalities like His Holiness, which I feel have crossed all the boundaries of these disciplines. And this is what we call as the Brahm Vidya. Once you have Brahm Vidya, it doesn't matter whether you are a physicist, you are a chemist, you are any other area. It cuts across, and then you can look at, you get the all-pervading knowledge which you get, and you can present a universal and an understandable view of the world processes. So we are very grateful to you, So Holiness, that you agreed to come here. And he has agreed to be here for full 2 days. I think it's really great that he will be listening to all the speeches and finally getting some concluding remarks at the end of the speech. But before that, today, he will be giving his speech now. And we all look forward to that one. I'm just an in-between. I came here, but I think we are all looking forward to listen to His Holiness. Thank you very much once again.
Thank you, sir, for the most wonderful address. And now, with much respect and humility, I request His Holiness to deliver his speech. Also, the radios are kept on the side of your seats. Thank you.
Respected elder brothers and sisters and rest of brothers and sisters. Now here, firstly, I consider myself one normal human being, not something abnormal. Isn't it? Some people say a little bit sort of strange things. Yeah. So therefore, I just describe a normal human being. Yeah. Then, from young age, I think 7, 8 years old, I start memorizing some of the Nalanda masters' writing. And then at the same time, now even you see, now age, now 81 years old now. See some of this Nalanda thought. Every day is reflect on these points. Very helpful to maintain peace of mind and also open mind. Because Nalanda tradition, according Buddha's own sort of advice to us, "O my follower, bhikshus, scholars should not accept my teaching out of faith, out of devotion, but rather thorough investigation and experiment." So that advice, I think really very helpful to open our mind and fully utilize our intelligence. So very helpful. Over 80 years, this teaching really immense help. Meantime, even when I was quite young, 19, 20, around that, I already developed serious sort of interest about science. Firstly, mechanic thing. Then that
Opened the door.
that is a lead, is interest about science. So perhaps this is, may not be relevant. When I was in Peking, 1954, 55, you see, I have several meetings with Chairman Mao Zedong. One occasion, he told me, "Your mind is very scientific-minded." Very scientific-minded.
Scientific.
So then Mao Zedong expressed, "Religion is poison." So now here you see, the Mao Zedong, you see, at that time, I'm quite young, Mao Zedong, you see, notice my thinking is a more scientific sort of way, like that. So Chairman Mao Zedong felt it may be very suitable to say religion is poison. So, so then, after come to India as a refugee, new opportunity meeting with people from different sort of walks of life, and including different spiritual traditions. And then one, I feel something very important thing is meeting with scientists. genuine scientist. So then I think the field, scientific field, cosmology, neurobiology, and physics, including quantum physics, then psychology. Now over 30 years, I have serious sort of dialogue with modern scientists, mainly American scientists and some European also. So the professor, others, right from the beginning, this is my colleagues, really wonderful. Now we're both getting older and older now. So as a result of 30 years of discussion with scientists, eventually it become immense mutual benefit to scientists about mind, about emotion, at very subtle level relation, mind and brain, these things. Then to us, the thorough, very detailed explanation about matters or all these things. As I mentioned earlier, cosmology, Big Bang, all these, really very helpful. One casualty is I no longer believe Mount Meru. That's one casualty. I publicly mentioning. I think while I think several 100,000 people still believe Mount Meru there. I mean, those mainly those, and some Hindus and also some is a Buddhist, I think. But from that viewpoint, I'm no longer Buddhist. But you see, the Four Noble Truths, and ultimately true truth. If you analyze more, think more, it becomes clearer, clearer. So like that. So in any way, to us, you see, they're very helpful. Certain sort of deeper knowledge about matters and these things from scientists. To scientists, as I mentioned earlier, using these mental things. So sometimes I maybe too much, too proud way, too presumptuous way. The Western psychology, compare ancient Indian psychology, Western psychology looks like kindergarten level. Ancient Indian psychology, highly developed, wonderful. So all our knowledge comes from India. Before Buddhism in general, particularly Nalanda sort of tradition, reached Tibet, see, I think quite simple life. And also mental thinking also quite simple. But then, Shanda Rakshita, invited by Tibetan emperor, 8th century. He was, I think at that time, 8th century, I think he was top scholar of Nalanda institution. So he introduced Buddhism according to Nalanda tradition. He himself, great philosopher and great logician. So the way he introduced Buddhism in Tibet, they combine philosophy and logic. That's, I think, very, very helpful. Very helpful. I think today, as a matter of fact, I think among different Buddhist countries, and I think several million Buddhists on this planet, I think it seems now quite clear. Only Tibetan, we kept Nalanda tradition more intently. Right? Intently. Oh. So we really pay much attention, serious study, in order to become a normal scholar. You need at least 20 years rigorous study and root text learned by heart. Then each word explained according those authentic commentary about these root text. So many scholars, you see, even those who was the commentary wrote by Nalanda master, also you see, memorized. I'm not. Only those root text like that. So therefore, you see, now, you know, the close contact with scientists is really mutual benefit, immense benefit. Then I think maybe, around 15, 20 years ago, one occasion in Delhi, one sort of brief interfaith meeting. Interfaith or some intellectual sort of meeting. The late Rajaramana, physicist, his nickname, the India's Sakharov, isn't it? He helped a nuclear weapon, like that. So in Delhi, one time, you see, he told me, the quantum physics in the world, something new. He found in Nagarjuna's writing the concept of quantum physics already there. As an Indian, he told me he feels very proud. Quantum physics to the world, something new. But this country, 2,000 years ago, already you see, developed that concept. He was first opener of my mind about quantum physics like that, and some similarity, the Nagarjuna sort of, the philosophy. Then, I think a number of occasions, some sort of discussion with the quantum physicist, including others. So then, I think 1 year ago, in Calcutta University,
Presidency
University, they invited me. While the Vice-chancellor introduced some of the teachers, and one teacher, quantum physicist. And since I have some interest about quantum physics, so then I asked him, I would like to meet you more leisure time. Then we met. Then some discussion. Then, you see, it became clear, according to quantum physics, you see, nothing objectively exists. And then, because of that, when observer there, observed also there. When no longer observer,
you cannot talk about.
No observed. So this also, you see, brings the Chittamatra sort of view. You see, since using, you see, that reason, so long observer there, things are there. The observer no longer there, the thing not there. So then the Chittamatra, use this fact or this reason, things, of course, Chittamatra also accept, forms and sounds, these things, but these things not exist externally. All are some kind of mental projections, right? Like that. So designated. So here, as a result of discussion with that quantum physicist, that professor, I understand the one part Chittamatra's sort of view. External things does not exist externally. Then everything does not exist objectively. Now here, of course, mainly physical things, not the consciousness of these things. So therefore, that some similarities with Nagarjuna's philosophy, emptiness, or patit samupanda, everything interconnected or interrelated. So finally, designation. Nothing exists independently. So then I asked him at that moment, at that meeting, I told him, oh, I really want to have some kind of discussion or seminar, quantum physicist and Buddhist sort of scholars who knows about these Chittamatra's views and the Madhyamaka view. He agreed. So, the idea come that way. Now then later, I request your university, you are willing, to organize and give this facility. So I very much appreciate. Thank you. Thank you. So then also, I very much appreciate some Tibetan scholars and also some American and some other countries who also have genuine interest, and also I think I can say practitioner. Some of our friends, some from America, some Russia, like that. Then the Madhyamaka philosophy or Chittamatra philosophy is ancient Indian sort of philosophy, not Tibetan. We simply learned from you. So these are your treasure. Now I think the last, perhaps I think a few centuries, our Indian gurus not much pay attention about these things. So this is actually your own treasure, but you feel these treasure are nice, put in museum. Not necessarily be living there, like that. Now you see time changing. Say, 80-year-old person, my life, you see, saw the early part. People talk much about material value, and with that, knowledge of science also you see used for economy or other things. Later part of 20th century, among the scientists and also medical scientists, you see, they begin to feel peace of mind is very essential for health, good health. And also then more and more intellectual thinking, the thinking way, and including scientists, now feel much problem which we are facing today, ultimately related with mind, emotion. Even these religions, actually a source of compassion. All major religious traditions, their main teaching, main message is practice of love. Through centuries, these different religious traditions really provide us the awareness, the importance of love, sense of brotherhood, sisterhood, and serving others. Now, due to some other factor, these sort of factor, these source, also now dividing people, and worst case, killing in the name of faith. So this problem cannot solve by technology or money. So certainly will not solve by force. Because this problem first start here. Anger, hatred. That also, you see, very much mixed with fear, distrust, then frustration, then anger. So now, many scientists, many educationists, you see, really now showing seriously about how to deal about our emotion. We are not talking about next life, or heaven, or hell. We are talking this very life. So all these problems, most of these problems which we are facing is essentially our own creation, man-made problem. So when I use the word man-made, ladies, what do you feel? Of course, when I say humanity, just man, okay. But I think, as a matter of fact, I think most sort of troublemaker are, I think, mostly male. In the past, I think of the past several centuries, usually we call hero, or war hero. Hero is, in a sense, murderer, organized. One individual kill one person, murder, very bad. One human being killed thousand, several thousand, 100,000. We call hero. Great. Most of these heroes are male. Maybe some exception. Otherwise, most of these killers are male. Now, again, according to scientists, they find female have more sort of sensitive about others' pain. I'm not going to explain in detail. So therefore, you see, in any way, you see, all these trouble we created. So sometimes I jokingly is telling people, expressing, when we face some problem, war, something, we pray to God or Buddha. If we have opportunity meeting Buddha or God and request them, please bring peace, I think God or Buddha say, violence, I not created, you created. So you see, since this problem you started, when I kindly, graciously give you free will, you utilize wrong way. So all this killing, all these problems, you created. So you have the responsibility to solve. Create problems by you and ask me some answer. Nonsense. Isn't it? So therefore, you see, now time come. We human beings, 7 billion human beings, it's our responsibility to build happy world, ultimately compassionate world, not angry world. If those people who believe Creator, then nobody say Creator is full of anger. Nobody say that. Creator is full of compassion, infinite love. So the best way to worship, to offer God or Buddha is we carry our activities more peaceful way, more compassionate way. That's the best way to offer, to serve, to offer, to worship, like that. So now here, if we, you see, say this with certain quotation, then now today, out of 7 billion, over 1 billion non-believer, and among 6 billion believer, some not very serious. Isn't it? So therefore, now we need a certain sort of method, you see, to bring conviction in 7 billion human beings' mind. The compassionate mind is immense benefit to yourself, including your health, and to create happy family, harmonious family, harmonious, happy society, happy community. Finally, harmonious humanity, happy humanity. So, harmonious, happy humanity not come from sky, cannot create by government, but we individual. We should create, firstly, peace, one individual's mind. Then creates that share with your family member. And then one family, 10 family, 100 family, that way, that's the way to change the atmosphere of the community. So religion, of course, through centuries, really worked hard, or really made tremendous contribution, but not adequate. So we need secular way to promote these inner value for our own interest and interest for the world, humanity. And that also related with environment issue. So therefore, in order to promote, in order to create a happy humanity, happy world, peaceful world, I think, as I mentioned earlier, 20th century, you see people, in the early part of 20th century, I think people, you see really, the violence, war is something normal way in order to protect yourself, in order to win yourself. But now, later part, now that concept changed, still changing. So therefore, now, you see, I think the beginning of this 21st century, there's a new sort of tendencies where, new way of thinking, inner peace, and dealing with our emotion. These are something important. So scientific research, very, very helpful. And our common experience and common sense and scientific findings, very, very helpful to educate people warm-heartedness is the key factor for happy life, happy family, happy community, finally, happy humanity. So, you see, this Kazoda, with this view, you see, now here, I think two ways. One reason, my series of Kazoda discussion with a scientist is simply expand the knowledge, right? Within the science. Up to now, I think up to the early part, or in the classical way, science only thinking matters. Not much talk about mind, emotion. Real troublemaker is not brain, but emotion. Still, the emotion or mind, still a little bit mysterious thing, isn't it? Now scientists, some top scientists, now really showing interest, you see, about mind, about emotion, and how to tackle. So this simply, you see, expansion field of science. That is the one thing, one purpose. Another purpose, now here I think our sort of the meeting or dialogue, Buddhist Madhyamaka philosophy mainly, and quantum physics is simply, you see, one way, simply the academic level. Then another purpose, in order to, in order the scientist become peaceful scientist, not angry scientist. You see, these knowledge helpful in order to bring inner peace. Once inner peace there, then the face also become much more pleasure, much more pleasant sort of face. I think automatically smile. I think we should precisely smile. There are different smiles: artificial smile, genuine smile, negative smile also there, diplomatic smile. So I think genuine smile, which I think dogs and cats, some extent, you see, they appreciate, they know artificial smile or genuine smile. So genuine smile is the reflection of inner peace, love, compassion, trust. So I think now the scientists also, number of my friend, top scientists, well-known scientists, now they themselves, you see, since, you see, more knowledge about system of emotion. You see, they themselves used to find much more inner peace. So I think these detailed thing, I think the scientist, author, may tell you. So two purpose. One, simply sort of expand our knowledge. And the second, you see, these give us views are very important. Emotion, in order to tackle emotion, not by another emotion, but mainly awareness. Ultimately, our warm-heartedness and sharp mind, intelligence combined, then, you see, we can make greater contribution for happy humanity. Just warm-heartedness itself, alone, not much.
Usually, you see, we have some kind of research.
No, giving analogies and examples.
Intelligence like I. As a warm-heartedness, you see, is real sort of ultimate source of strength. But without I, you cannot do much. So combine warm-heartedness and this marvelous human intelligence combined. Then we can see, we can tell, we can share other people. Everybody wants a happy life. So then, the ultimate source of happy life, not money, not power, not existing modern education, but more deeper, more holistic. It is something very important. So main purpose of our meeting is to see, because of the raise awareness about these matters. So university really, you see this, because of the field where human intelligence, human mind further develop. So university, very, very important. If university creates more hatred, it's awful. University creates more sense of community and thinking, 21st century, 22nd century, then wonderful. Okay, thank you, that's all. I want my selfish thing. I want to tell you, at afternoon session, I think around 3, I want to seek permission from you. So perhaps, you see, afternoon 1 tea break, then I will leave. Then you, if possible, another 1 hour, 1.5 hour further discussion. I feel that. So because you see, now, quite old person, you see, my daily life start from 2:30 or 3. This morning, 2, I get up. And my sort of prayer, every day, each day, about 5 hours. So including thinking, quantum physics, something similar quantum physics. There's nothing there. Self-centered attitude. You see, entirely based on independent feeling of life, feeling of independent self. So, like quantum physics, Madhyamaka philosophy, thinking that, then really shaking very basis of our destructive emotion. All destructive emotion, you see, entirely based on certain sort of, because of the mental attitude, grasping, independent existence. So that's the basis of the creation of Symbolism.
The wrong, different wrong ways of thinking.
So that another scientist, one American scientist, Aaron Beck, see, he told me, see, very old person, a lot of experience. So he told me, when we develop anger, the object which feel angry, so that object appears very, very negative. But actually, 90% of that negativeness is mental projection. because of wrong view, grasping independent existence. So once you develop deeper awareness, nothing independently exists. That immense help. My own experience, very, very helpful. Very helpful. So whether Buddhist or non-Buddhist, you see these theory, very important, very useful. Make your mind more neutral. And then one beautiful thing is, this sort of understanding about reality, nothing exists independently. You see, that understanding, very helpful for positive emotion, such as karuna, maitri, like that. Because these not depend on wrong view. Anger, attachment, jealousy, all these destructive emotion based on wrong view. So my daily sort of meditation, you see, always thinking these things, very, very helpful. So my point is, you see, I get up usually, you see, very early. So late afternoon, combined with age, and almost dead, half dead. So around 3, give me permission, leave. And then tomorrow morning, meeting, more fresh. Okay. Thank you, that's all.
Thank you so much, Your Holiness, for your most enlightening address, which as always is deeply profound and remains inspirational to the whole world. Now I humbly request the Vice-chancellor, Professor Sopori, and the Rector, Professor Sen, to take the seats in the front row so that we can begin with the first session. Thank you, sir.
Oh, I see. Thank you.
With this, we have come to an end to the opening ceremony, and we will start with the first session of the day, for which I would humbly request the first speaker, Professor Michel Bidbeau, professor at CNRS, France, who will speak on the topic Quantum Physics, Interdependence, and a No-View Stance, and the chair of this session, Professor N. Mukunda, from the Center for Theoretical Physics, Indian Institute of Science, Bangalore. I request both of them to come up on the stage and initiate the session.
Thank you. It's really a pleasure and honor to speak again about quantum mechanics to Your Holiness. I'm very glad to do that. And I changed a little bit with respect to last time when I spoke about quantum mechanics in South India. So the title of my talk today is Quantum Mechanics, a theory about no intrinsic properties and with no view of the world. It's quite well known, in fact, that quantum mechanics is a theory with no intrinsic properties since the time of Werner Heisenberg in 1925, when he said that quantum mechanics cannot speak of the intrinsic properties of electrons. It cannot speak of the intrinsic trajectory of the electrons around the nucleus of the atom. It only speaks about what he called observable quantities, namely quantities that are relative to the measurement apparatus and to the act of measurement which is performed on it. It's less well known and, yes, it's less accepted nowadays, especially in the West, that quantum physics is also a theory with no view of the world. Many Western scientists are looking for a view of the world that could be adapted to quantum mechanics, which fits with quantum mechanics. And in fact, it turns out to be very difficult and generates a lot of paradoxes. So maybe the best way is to accept that quantum physics is a theory with no view of the world. I think these two negative features are quite in tune with the spirit of Madhyamaka philosophy. So when we compare quantum physics and Madhyamaka philosophy, so I wonder whether it works, yes? Ah, yes, okay, yes. Oh, thank you. When we compare the two things, quantum physics and Madhyamaka philosophy, some people say that we are comparing two views of the world. But I think that, in fact, what we are comparing, more than two views of the world, is two criticisms of views of the world, two critiques of even metaphysics. In Madhyamaka, we find, for instance, that emptiness is the relinquishing of all views, especially in this 13th Karika of Nagarjuna. In quantum physics, we find something very similar. If we read some stuff by Niels Bohr, Niels Bohr said that quantum mechanics is a mathematical symbolism intended to predict probabilistically the outcome of experiments. Therefore, quantum mechanics, according to him, is not a picture of the world out there independently of us. It's a symbolism which is meant to predict events which are relative to our actions, to our experimental attempts at measuring. Now, if we try to explain this famous statement by Nagarjuna that emptiness is the relinquishing of all views, we find especially the comment by Tsongkhapa, who roughly says that the idea that we have to reject all theses is to be understood as intending a rejection of inherent existence, not existence in general, of course, not nihilism, but only inherent existence. But of course, relational existence is something obvious and accepted. Heisenberg said something very similar in a book of 1955. He said that quantum theory is no longer an image of nature as it is in itself independently of us. It's rather to be conceived as an image of our relationship with nature. So here again, we have the theme of relations and of dependent arising, which is introduced by both systems. So now, you know, this kind of way of understanding quantum mechanics can help a lot to make clearer certain statements of quantum mechanics which have appeared paradoxical before. So much paradoxical that most physicists were puzzled by them. For instance, there is a famous saying by Niels Bohr that those who are not shocked by quantum theory cannot possibly have understood it. So that means that in order to catch what quantum physics is saying, you have to accept to be really stunned, to have all your views of nature and even of knowledge completely turned upside down. Feynman, Richard Feynman, the famous American physicist, said something very similar. He said, but even stronger, maybe even shorter, nobody understands quantum mechanics. And yet, Richard Feynman he was one of the best quantum physicists in the history of human thought. So if he says that, that means that it's quite difficult. But now, maybe, says Niels Bohr, maybe the problem is that we have not clearly made our choice between modes of understanding. Maybe we can understand quantum physics in a completely new way, not precisely as a picture, an image of nature, but as Heisenberg would have said that, as an image of our relations with nature. So if we change completely the meaning of the word understanding, then we might well understand quantum mechanics in spite of what Feynman said. So you see that in recent times, there have been a development of a new kind of understanding of the meaning of quantum mechanics as a no-view predictive formalism. Many scientists, many physicists, not all of them, certainly. There are many of them who resist nowadays, but many of them recently got a new understanding of quantum mechanics. For instance, Anton Zeilinger, whom you know very well, the famous physicist of Vienna in Austria. He said that quantum theory is not a theory about what the world is in itself, independently of us, but it's a theory of the limits of the experimental information which is made available to us by experiments, therefore by our systematic relation with the objects we try to know. Another scientist, Rob Speckens, said that quantum states are not states of objects. They are states of our incomplete knowledge about objects. Here again, you see incomplete knowledge about objects with many hyphens. That means that it's relational rather than absolute. Chris Fuchs, a very young physicist, American physicist who teaches in Boston, told something maybe even more radical. He said, quantum theory is not a theory of nature at all, whatever we mean by nature out there independently of us. It's just a calculus for gambling on agents' experiences. Namely, we have to gamble, we have to predict something about what will come next, when we make experiments, and quantum theory is a probabilistic theory which enables us to gamble about these future results. So as soon as we have accepted this new kind of understanding of quantum mechanics, then many so-called mysteries of the theory become clearer. For instance, you know, there is a famous mystery in quantum mechanics. It's the so-called collapse of the wave function. People think that we associate in quantum mechanics a certain wave function to each physical system, for instance, to an electron, to an atom, and so on. And that this wave function enables us to calculate the probability of a certain experimental outcome. Now, as soon as we have made a measurement, for instance, a measurement of the position, this wave function suddenly collapses. It became what is called a wave packet, very narrow, very little, very localized. Whereas at the beginning, the wave function was extended everywhere, in all the space. So how is it that suddenly a measurement changes everything and collapses a big wave which fills all space into a little point? How is it possible? It was a mystery. Now, if we accept that, in fact, this famous wave function or quantum state is, in fact, only a mathematical tool to predict probabilities, then the whole mystery disappears. Because it's obvious that when we know more about a system, we change our probabilities, because the probabilities are our valuations, you know. For instance, James Hartle said it's not surprising that after a measurement, the state must be changed just to be in accord with new information, because the state is nothing intrinsic. It's something relative to our knowledge. For instance, let's take the example of a coin. We play face or tail. We throw the coin into the box, and it falls on either face or tail. Before we know anything about the coin, before we have opened the box and seen in it what is the position of the coin, we have to ascribe the probability 1/2 to finding the coin on face or the coin on tail. But when we open the box, we see in the box, suddenly we see, for instance, that the coin is on face. And then we say, the next time we'll come and see in the box, we'll certainly find the coin on face. Therefore, the probability has jumped from 1/2 to 1. One means certainty. And it has jumped, it has collapsed, so to speak. But this is no real collapse, this is not intrinsic collapse. It's just a collapse of our knowledge. Now, it's, of course, the situation in quantum mechanics is slightly different to that, but not so much. The difference is that in that case of a coin, we ignore what is the true position of the coin. But in quantum mechanics, it's even more radical. The coin, the little coin, the electron, for instance, would have no intrinsic position by itself. And therefore, the position of the electron is not only unknown, it is undetermined. But apart from this detail, which is very important, the situation is the same between the coin and the electron. Now, let's do a test. If it's true, as you know, all these scientists said, that quantum theory is nothing more and nothing else than a way to gamble about the outcome of an interaction between us and these objects, therefore, this theory should apply to any kind of object, not only to electrons, provided these objects have the same characteristic of having no intrinsic properties, but only relational properties. And it's the case. The test is positive, because recently, in the last 10 years, quantum theory has been applied to many other fields than physics. For instance, it has been applied to predict human decisions and human perceptions. That seems quite strange, because you think, what is common between electrons and human beings, human minds, actually? The common point is that both, namely quarks or electrons and so on, and human minds on the other side, have a common feature. This common feature is to have no intrinsic feature, namely no intrinsic nature. You know, the reactions of an electron is dependent on the type of experiment you do. Sorry, yes, I have to change this. So it's the reaction of an electron is relative to the experiment you do. But also the reaction of a human being is relative to the question you ask. So let me take an example. In microphysics, it is said usually that an electron has a spin. But in fact, this property of having a spin is not an intrinsic property. You cannot say that the electron intrinsically rotates around itself to give the famous spin. The spin is relative to certain acts of measurement with certain kinds of apparatuses that are called Stern-Gerlach apparatuses, which use non-uniform magnetic field. So the spin arises only, especially the values of the projections of the spin on certain directions of space, arise only relative to those types of experimental apparatuses. When you ask questions to human beings about the meaning of words, something very similar occurs. For instance, let's take the very simple word in English, head. And let me ask the question, what does head means? If I say that without any context, you may give several replies. But if I impose a certain context of speech, you will be prone to give this or that answer. For instance, if I say, okay, now I have legs and arms and a chest. What is the meaning of head? Usually, many people say, oh, head, I know what you mean. It's just a part of our body, the upper part of our body. But now, if I use another context of speech, for instance, I say, I speak of the Indian state. I speak of the parliament, I speak of the president, and so on, of the Indian state. Then, if I ask you after that, what is the meaning of head? You may think, oh, you mean head of a state or head of a company. So in this case, the meaning of head is a leader. Or if I say, okay, I speak of sources, origins, and so on. So I change the context of speech. And in that case, you may be more inclined to answer, oh, I mean that head is probably meaning a beginning. So according to the context of speech, you change the answer you give to the question, what is the meaning of head? Now, if you count the answers, you will find that they are exactly predicted by quantum mechanics, or quantum theory, rather. So that means that quantum theory is much more general than physics. It is a general theory for any kind of relational features. Let me clarify now certain strange problems or paradoxes of quantum theory by way of this purely relational view of its status. For instance, you know that it has been very surprising to see that quantum objects such as electrons or atoms have sometimes wave-like features and sometimes corpuscle-like features. It was so surprising that Einstein, who discovered this duality, was completely stunned by it. He said, you know, he discovered that for photons. Actually, we say now photons, but we should rather say light at that time. So he knew that light, before his work, was considered as made of waves, electromagnetic waves. But he discovered that light also behaved as particles. He called these particles quanta of light, and thereafter it was called photons. He was so surprised by this duality that he said it's impossible, because you cannot associate an extended wave with a little thing which is completely localized. It's impossible. It sounds impossible. But he added, it's impossible, but God seems to have found a trick to associate the two. So he was completely stunned by that. So maybe you don't have to be so puzzled by that, if you accept that, in fact, there are neither intrinsic waves nor intrinsic particles, but only relational waves and relational particles. Yes. For instance, you know, we observe this kind of pattern, which is a diffraction pattern. We can also observe an interference pattern. And we say, usually, waves produce this kind of pattern. Since electrons also produce this kind of pattern, therefore, they are waves. But I must warn you, this is not a correct reasoning in logic. The fact that waves produce this pattern doesn't mean that anything that produces this pattern is a wave. It would be true if no other explanations of this kind of diffraction or interference pattern explain the same patterns. But in fact, there are alternative explanations, and therefore, it's not true that electrons are intrinsically a wave. The same reasoning can be made for corpuscle. It's not true that electrons are intrinsically corpuscle. Therefore, Bohr said that we don't have either corpuscles or waves. We have neither corpuscles nor waves, neither intrinsic corpuscles nor intrinsic waves, but we have corpuscle-like appearances and wave-like appearances, namely relational features, features that co-arise with certain experimental contexts in which they manifest. This is Bohr's view. This, at least Bohr mode of thinking. Moreover, there is even a theorem, a very precise mathematical theorem, that shows that if you fabricate a theory that applies to phenomena that are relative to mutually exclusive apparatuses or experimental context, then you are bound to observe wave-like distributions of phenomena. So that means here again that you don't have intrinsically existing waves out there. You have phenomena, namely co-arising appearances, that take a distribution which is very similar to waves. Okay, so now let's see that interference, this strange wave-like feature, also occurs in a completely different context. It occurs in human decisions, in the field of human decisions. That seems absolutely amazing, but it fits what I said before, that quantum physics can be applied to all sorts of situations, including to the case of human decisions. Let's take a very simple game, in which, here again, you throw a coin and you play face or tail. And you gamble. And you are said, if the coin falls on head, you win 2,000 rupees. If the coin falls on tail, you lose 1,000 rupees. Okay, would you play this game? Many people say, yes, let's try to play the game. Then the coin is thrown and it falls on face. You have won 2,000 rupees. Would you play again? 70% of the people say, yes, I would play again because I want to earn, to win more. If the coin falls on tail, you have lost 1,000 rupees. And you are asked, would you play again? Most people here again say, yes, I want to play again because I want to win some money, even though I've lost some money now. Okay, that's perfect. Now, let's suppose you have another case in which you have thrown the coin, but you have left the box closed and you don't know the outcome of the game. What is your decision according to whether you will play again or not? In normal logic, you would expect that your decision will be the average of the two decisions. Maybe that there is only a 65% probability that you decide to play again. But it's not the case. It's not true. In fact, people decide only at 35% that they will play again. How can it be accounted for? The best account which has been given is by quantum theory, ascribing you not a state of uncertainty according to whether the coin is on face and the coin is on tail, but rather a state of complete superposition, which is much stronger than an uncertainty. And therefore, this accounts for a kind of destructive interference between the two options, between a yes and no. So you have exactly the same phenomenon of interference for the decisions of human beings as for the electrons, which is absolutely stunning. So what is, once again, the common point between human beings, human minds especially, and electrons? Only the feature of non-intrinsic determinations. Only this. Now, there is a famous feature which is developed in Buddhism. It's no longer relation between the feature of objects and the knowledge we have of them, but is correlativity of features. It's mutual relativity. It was explained beautifully by an old Buddhist text by a metaphor. Or the metaphor of two sheaves of reeds. I have to. Yes, the metaphor of the two sheaves of reeds. So you have a sheaf of reeds which is leaning on the other sheaf of reed, And if you remove one sheaf of reeds, the other one falls. If you remove this one, the other one falls. So the property of leaning towards is relative. The property leaning towards of one sheaf of reeds is relative to the property leaning towards of the other sheaf of reeds. In Madhyamaka, it's quite similar. And for instance, in Chandrakirti, one finds a beautiful set of words that very well expresses this idea of mutual relativity. For instance, pratitya samutpada in Chandrakirti is met equivalent to two other Sanskrit words, paratantra and paraparasiddha. Paratantra, which means woven of the other, and paraparasiddha, which means established by one another. I think I'm correct, of course. So that means that you know, there is mutual co-arising of features. Now, in quantum physics, things are very similar, and these things are called entanglement. Let's suppose I have two particles with spin 1/2, and they are correlated to one another. In so far that if the spin of the one particle is found to be up, the spin of the other particle will be found to be down. But if the spin of this particle is found to be down, then the spin of the other particle will be found to be up. So there is correlation, or we say anti-correlation rather. But there is no sense in which you can say in quantum mechanics that this particle has intrinsically the value up, and this one has intrinsically value down. It's only relative to one another that they are determined. The property of one, if the property of one is up, the property of the other one is down, and conversely. So the if then means relation. It's not the property of this is that, and the property of this one is another. It's only relational. So much so that certain physicists, such as Mermin, said correlations have physical reality, but that which they correlate does not. So they landed into a form of relational realism. But maybe we have to be careful about realism, even relational realism, actually. I think we have to be careful because we have seen that properties are relative to the way we approach them, to the context of their measurement. So maybe we have to say that also of the mutual relations between properties. Nagarjuna said something very similar. He said, for whomever emptiness of own being is a view, that one has accomplished nothing. Even emptiness of own being should not be taken as intrinsic. It should not be taken as a view of things as they are. And it's a case also in physics. For instance, it has been showed experimentally that quantum entanglement is not produced by intrinsic productive causes. There has been an experiment made in Geneva quite recently, in 2000. Also, there has been a theorem that shows that relational realism fares no better than property realism. So you don't have to be so assertive as Mermin did, that instead of the physical reality of properties, you have to assert the physical reality of relations. I think even relational realism is to be criticized. Yeah. Now, let's think of another very important feature, which is linked to the one I've just discussed before, namely entanglement. There has been a famous theorem demonstrated by John Bell, the famous Bell's inequalities. Bell's inequalities are mathematical relations between measured quantities that you can demonstrate if you posit two assumptions. First assumption is locality, namely that properties do not have influenced everywhere in the world. They have just influence around them, namely just locally. The second assumption you have to use in order to demonstrate these Bell's inequalities is realism, namely the idea that objects have intrinsic properties. Okay, now, as soon as these inequalities were demonstrated, Bell compared them with the predictions of quantum theory, and he showed that quantum theories violate these inequalities. Moreover, experiments have been done since then, and they have demonstrated that quantum physics was right, and that indeed the Bell's inequalities are violated. Now, if it's true that that Bell's inequalities are violated, that means that one of the two assumptions, or maybe the two assumptions together that were used in order to demonstrate the inequalities are wrong. Either locality is wrong, therefore properties influence all the rest of the universe, or some people say the universe is a whole. First possibility. Second possibility, the assumption of realism is wrong, namely that it's not true that electrons and atoms have intrinsic properties, independent of measurement apparatus. Most people, most physicists thought that it was locality that has to be challenged. Most people said that quantum physics is non-local. But it's not absolutely obvious. One other possibility is that realism is not true, namely that these entities have not intrinsic properties. And now, we can test the second possibility by once again applying quantum theory to human decisions. There has been an experiment with this kind of questions about the meaning of words according to the context. Some researchers have asked many people, thousands of people, questions about the meaning of words. Coupled questions about the meaning of words. They have counted the statistics of the answers, and they have found that in these answers, Bell's inequalities are violated just as much as they are violated by electrons. So that what is the common point, once again, between human minds and electrons? Certainly not the fact, or at least we don't think, we are not obliged to think that it's because, say, human beings have a faculty of telepathy. No, it's just because they don't have already a decision which is made in their mind. The decision depends on the context. It depends on the context of the question. In that case, you violate the Bell's inequalities just as much as you violate the Bell's inequalities when you made the test with particles. And Arthur will speak of these tests about particles later on, tomorrow. So I think it's very clear that the main feature which characterizes quantum physics is no other feature than the absence of intrinsic nature. So I think it's very similar to Madhyamaka, after all. Thank you very much for your attention.
Here, according to ancient Indian philosophical traditions, in the object there are two types, negative and affirmative. Those objects which comes as negative, whether it's non-affirming negative or affirming negative. Non-affirming negative means simply negating an object and without mere just absence of that object, and it's not affirmed anything. So therefore, when you, in the case of having no intrinsic existence, it simply negates the object, and apart from that, nothing is being affirmed. probably there is a relation of this viewpoint and what you explained. The fact that things are dependent and having no intent existence, I think this is really similar with what is being explained in Madhyamaka philosophy. So this has been discussed for 100 years. So now the main problematic idea is having refuted the object of negation. What is it that is left? And if there's nothing to affirm, then many people say that then this is nihilism. So having negated the object of negation, what is left behind is just the name. So it's just on the name, things should be able to function. So that's the most problematic area in the Madhyamaka philosophical texts. So this is probably not only the problem of Madhyamaka, but also a problem of the quantum physics. So therefore, in the Madhyamaka viewpoint, even though ordinarily when things appear to us, it appears to us as having inherent existence. But when you try to find the basis of designation, you are not able to find anything, and then you get frightened thinking, what is now left? There is nothing left. So you get completely astounded. So that is the problematic and most difficult point of the Madhyamaka view. That is, to having negated the object of negation, what is being affirmed and what is left behind, that makes life go on and makes things function. So in the case of quantum physicists also, they are facing this problem of then what is the criteria by which you say that things exist. So it's okay to say that things exist nominally. So even if people say you are nihilistic, then of course you are not nihilistic because you are developing all these wonderful minds of loving kindness, compassion and so forth. But if you are not satisfied with this superficial presentation and nominal presentation, conventional presentation, if you try to pinpoint something, then that you will not be able to pinpoint. So you can see this similarity between quantum physics and Madhyamaka viewpoint. So what I feel and think is that right now when we talk about quantum physics, it is treated as an object of knowledge and where you are trying to find the basis of designation. And in the Buddhist school, this process of trying to find the basis of designation, the purpose of trying to find that object of designation is to pinpoint the lack of foundation of misconception and wrong consciousness. As I explained earlier, the root cause of many of this improper mental engagement is because we take it for granted that things exist inherently, and it's because of this misconception of reality that produces hatred, anger, jealousy and so forth. So the purpose of the Buddhist philosophy and practice is how to eradicate the root causes of all these afflictive emotions. So that's why I repeatedly tell people that with the view of the quantum physics, of course, it is, so please do not leave it at the level of intellectual understanding, but one should be able to develop a very strong conviction within one's mind. And then if you look at those scientists who really do not talk about this only on the intellectual level but on the personal conviction, then you will probably find that these scientists may be able to have less improper mental engagements and exaggerations. And I once told Arthur to do some research on that, especially in the case of those people who are not just intellectually a good scholar, but who really have the conviction about the truth of this uncertainty or lack of inherent existence of the object. Okay.
I think I wish I want to observe your day-to-day life.
Yes, yes, yes.
Since you develop this full conviction about that quantum the quantum physics.
Yes, yes.
So nothing intrinsically. No.
Yes. Maybe I can tell you a story because, you know, there is a debate between physicists and philosophers in the West about whether we should choose a so-called realist interpretation of quantum mechanics in which you find something intrinsic to say, and other interpretations, such as the one I presented, in which you completely relinquish any discourse about intrinsic views. And when I was convinced of the second view, many years before, some people, some other physicists and philosophers asked me, but how can you live with this interpretation of physics? And I was puzzled. I said, maybe they are right. How can I live with that? And then I discovered Buddhism, and I said, God, that's it. That's the mode of being and of life that well corresponds to these ideas. So that's in my personal life, it's exactly this way that it worked, yes. Yes.
Oh, as you like. Okay.
It is a privilege and an honor for me to be in the presence of His Holiness and to be the discussion chair for this first technical session. With the permission of Professor Prasenjit Sen, I will take a few minutes to make some general remarks. But first, on behalf of all of us, I would like to thank Professor Bitbol for a very lucid presentation of a very subtle subject. At this point, let me make these few remarks. They are not meant to be a summary of what we just heard, but something by way of general background, which may help during the discussion, which we will have very soon. It is generally agreed that of all the major advances in 20th century physics, the quantum theory leading on to quantum mechanics and the two theories of relativity, it is quantum mechanics that has led to the deepest philosophical problems and debates. It was the result of an essentially European effort. And as Abraham Pais described it, quantum mechanics is a uniquely 20th century mode of thought. Is it okay? It has raised questions about reality, locality, observability, measurement, the role of probability in physics, and even the use of language. Many questions which seem reasonable and meaningful in classical physics become inadmissible and unanswerable in the quantum domain, because many tacit assumptions which we make in the classical context become invalid in quantum theory. There is a famous sentence from Wittgenstein, which I like very much, comes to one's mind: whereof one cannot speak, thereof one must be silent. The physical interpretation of the mathematical formalism of quantum mechanics is a very important part of the entire theory, as is the theory of measurement itself. The three main creators of quantum mechanics, Werner Heisenberg, Paul Dirac, and Erwin Schrödinger, were from Germany, England, and Austria, respectively. They received their Nobel Prizes together in the year 1933. It is natural for us to ask, what did they think about the role of philosophy in science? Both Heisenberg and Schrödinger had deep understanding of philosophy in the Western tradition and wrote eloquently about its relation to modern physics. Schrödinger also had great interest in parts of Indian philosophy, though as far as I know, he did not connect it to quantum mechanics in any way. His attitude towards the conventional interpretation of quantum mechanics was, on occasion, quite skeptical. As for the third creator of quantum mechanics, Dirac, I quote from a recent article by Freeman Dyson. He says, Dirac refused to engage in philosophical arguments about the interpretation of quantum mechanics. Dirac took no part in these debates and considered them to be meaningless. Human language describes the world of everyday life and lacks the concepts that could describe quantum processes accurately. Dirac said, we should stop arguing about words, stay with the mathematics, and allow the philosophical fog to blow away. Everyone would, of course, like to know what Albert Einstein thought about the place for philosophy in science. Again, I quote from Dyson, a philosophy for Einstein meant a general view of nature into which the scientific details can fit. It is worth mentioning here that in contrast to these figures, on the other side of the Atlantic, some leading physicists of a later generation had very different views. We heard the name of Richard Feynman during the talk, an iconic figure of 20th century physics, and this is what he had to say. Philosophy of science is about as useful to scientists as ornithology is to birds. Philosophers, incidentally, say a great deal about what is absolutely necessary for science, and it is always, so far as one can see, rather naive and probably wrong. I mention these only to show that from the scientist's side, the importance given to questions of a philosophical nature varies greatly from person to person. It reflects the cultural background in which one has grown up and lived. Therefore, a great deal of caution is needed in looking for connections between quantum ideas and ancient philosophical systems. To my mind, Heisenberg, the first discoverer of the quantum theory, Heisenberg described the situation extremely well in an essay in his book, Physics and Philosophy, and the speaker referred to this book. And this is very well expressed. He says, this comparison of the modern views in atomic physics with Greek philosophy should not be misunderstood. It may seem at first sight that the Greek philosophers have, by some kind of ingenious intuition, come to the same or very similar conclusions as we have in modern times, only after several centuries of hard labor with experiment and mathematics. This interpretation of the comparison would, however, be a complete misunderstanding. There is an enormous difference between modern science and Greek philosophy, and that is just the empiricistic attitude of modern science. The idea that one could single out some events from nature by an experiment did not occur to the Greek philosophers. Modern science has stood upon a much more modest, but at the same time much firmer basis than ancient philosophy. The statements of modern physics are in some way meant much more seriously than the statements of Greek philosophy. All the same, some statements of ancient philosophy are rather near to those of modern science. This simply shows how far one can get by combining the ordinary experience of nature without doing experiments with the untiring effort to get some logical order into the experience to understand it from general principles. So this is a rather long quote, but it's important. So for my own part, I have essentially the same feelings as in these matters as I just read. But I feel first, as physicists, we need to understand the philosophical ideas well, then judge how useful they are in the scientific context. And this part is always subjective. There is no unanimous view, and it depends very much on the person, depends on the sympathies of the person. So I have presented these remarks only hoping that they will serve as a useful background for the discussions. May I now invite questions to be addressed to our speaker, Professor Pitbull. I just thought standing here is easier for me to see the people who would like to ask questions. Professor Rajaram Nityananda. You need the microphone? He's bringing it.
Okay. You mentioned some experiments in what I would call human psychology, decision making.
Yeah.
And you drew parallels. I want to ask whether they were intended as parallels, because from what you said, you said quantum mechanics applies. Was that meant to be taken literally?
Yeah, it's meant to be taken almost literally. Namely, almost that means that quantum mechanics is a theory which has a probabilistic structure on the one hand, and on the other hand, it has some features which are very typical of physics, such as the symmetries, the spatial symmetries, and so on. And also the values of the Planck constant, h. If you remove symmetries and the Planck constant, you keep the probabilistic structure of quantum theory, and this is called generalized quantum theory. This generalized quantum theory can be applied to any situation in which the determinations are relative to the context of questions or measurement. So it's literally that quantum theory, at least this generalized part of quantum theory, can be applied to predict quantitatively the statistics of answers of human beings about certain questions. So it works. It works, and there is a whole literature nowadays about this kind of predictions.
So in particular, does it have complex numbers?
It doesn't have complex numbers.
It does not?
No.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's a very generalized version of the probabilistic structure of quantum physics. So it's no longer quantum physics. It's called generalized quantum theory.
Hello. Yeah, I wanted to ask something about singularity, because if the observer and the observed, they become one. For example, I am observing a horse, but if I ride on top of the horse, then I am behaving like a horse, because if the horse and the horse rider both become one, that means I am talking about dissolution or merging of two entities into one and behaving as singular. So if everything in this universe merge or dissolve into singularity, then I think at that level even quantum mechanics doesn't exist, because I am talking here the relativity of correlativity. That means the ultimate state lies beyond singularity, because it has to be somewhere. So till there is an observer or observer of the phenomena, so that means there will be an uncertainty, so there will be relativity and everything. But imagine when things...
Can you be brief, please?
Yeah. So my question is about singularity.
Yes, I understand. So of course your question is quite interesting. When in your example of somebody on a horse, since the determinations of human mind are relative to the context in which it is placed. And also the determinations of the horse's mind are relative of the circumstances in which it is placed. Therefore, the circumstance of a man on a horse determines one another's state of mind, and therefore they become not exactly one, but as one, because there is a sort of flux of mutual understanding. It's well known by horsemen. But now, what about quantum physics? In quantum physics, something very similar occurs, and you're right about that. You know, when quantum physics was first formulated, people spoke about the disturbance of the observed objects by the act of observation. But Niels Bohr criticized this idea. He said no, because in fact we cannot really separate what is due to the observed object and what is due to the observer. Instead of disturbance, we should speak of indivisibility, the indivisibility of the phenomenon. We cannot disentangle the two, observed and observer. It becomes one into the appearance. The appearance is the byproduct of the relation between the two, but the two are no longer completely separate of one another. So this view of phenomena by Bohr has spread out and has helped a lot, at least philosophers, to understand properly the meaning of quantum physics. So thank you for your question.
Just let us go to another and come back later. Yes, please.
Yeah. So one of the quotations that you had given was something about quantum entanglement not being produced by more intrinsic causes. So yeah, I mean, one understands you're not looking at temporal causes, something preceding in time or anything. But yeah. I mean, why why does one say that there's no more fundamental, say, logical or mathematical structure from which quantum entanglement can be a sort of a structure that emerges from a more fundamental mathematical structure? I mean, why would one take such a view? I mean, that's my question.
No, of course there is a mathematical structure. It's a very precise mathematical structure that accounts for the entanglement. It's therefore the entanglement itself, namely the observation of a correlation between the two particles, can be observed, and it's perfectly conform to the mathematical structure of quantum physics. But the fact that it's conform to the mathematical structure of quantum physics doesn't mean that it is intrinsically realized independent of any observation. Rather the contrary, since quantum theory is precisely a theory not of intrinsic nature, but of our relation with nature. Therefore, the fact that it is well predicted by, this correlation is well predicted by the formalism, the mathematical formalism of quantum physics, is rather a good proof that it is itself not intrinsic and relative to the observation of the correlation. So even the correlation, even the relation between two features is relative to an act of observation.
Yes, please. Can we have the microphone here?
In view of what we are saying, could you find a scientific explanation to the human placebo response?
Well, an explanation, I don't know, but it's not completely impossible that some elements of that can be predicted by a generalized quantum theory. Because generalized quantum theory is a non-committal probabilistic formalism that is able to predict all sorts of human reactions or reactions of any item which has no intrinsic decisions. Decisions that are only taken after the question is raised, okay? So, of course, I've not seen in the literature such attempt at accounting for placebo effect by quantum theory, but it's not absurd in principle. Not because quantum theory is probing deep into the human mind or the human brain, not at all, but rather the other way around. because quantum theory says nothing about the human mind, only about the probability of its reactions. Very non-committal, you see.
Yes.
So maybe, but
please. Professor, I'll make two statements, and then I'd like your view on that.
Yes.
First is on creation itself, because there's a point beyond which science and philosophy cannot go. And when I say creation itself, when creation started, the consciousness of the creator pervades every particle in the universe. That is a given. Second is, all the great sages whom we quote, they created philosophy, they've all said that their experience is beyond conceptualization. Neither the Buddha nor all the great yogis that I can quote to you, they've experienced the ultimate nature of the ultimate reality, but it is beyond conceptualization for us.
Okay, these two statements are quite apart from quantum theory. Quantum theory is much more restricted. It's much more simple, in fact. I claim that quantum theory is simple here. But, of course, quantum theory presupposes that there is human experience that you can, of which you can predict the outcome, of which you can predict the structure and the content. Therefore, human experience, or experience more generally, is something which is much more fundamental than anything that physics has to say, which is the background, the presupposition, the most fundamental feature of our lives. So in that respect, I would agree, of course, that experience and consciousness is something primary. I don't know about, its so-called metaphysical primacy, because, I'm not the kind of philosopher who likes to speculate metaphysically about the properties of things out there or the properties of the world. But I am what is called a phenomenologist. Namely, I take experience for granted, and I start every inquiry from experience. So, from that standpoint, I would say experience is the most basic feature of all, because it's where we are now, where we start our inquiry, and what makes everything meaningful. So without experience, there would be no inquiry, no meaning, no anything. So experience is fundamental.
Second row, yes,
please.
For 3,000 more years in Indian tradition, it speaks about two truths. The level of appearance and the level of reality. Whether it's the Buddhist and non-Buddhist philosophical tenet system or the general Buddhist philosophical system, the basis of experiment is the way things exist, not being satisfied by the level of appearance. So as we have already discussed, the way things exist, when you fathom and try to pinpoint it, you are not able to find anything. So this not being able to find through searching the basis of designation does not show that things do not exist, but it rather shows that things do not exist inherently. So I think that differentiation, I think, is important for you to know. And then the question whether there's a creator or not.
About the concept of creator, see, one part of Sankhyaism, you see, no concept of creator. Then Jainism, also no concept of creator. Buddhism, also no concept of creator. But then some of these things, of course, as you mentioned, you see, all sort of traditions, you see, accept certain things beyond our thought and our word. So it is better to live there, to leave it there.
Yeah.
I think keeping in mind the time available, we can have 2 more questions, first from there and then here. Please.
Professor, thank you. I'd like to ask you, when you mentioned there's a microscopic level, the electrons, those particles have no intrinsic nature. So it's a very parallel with Madhyamaka philosophy. That in very general, we have terms Savadama, Swabhava, Shunita, Shunya. The Swabhava means is intrinsic nature. In English, there's different terms. Translation says sometimes open nature. But in quantum mechanics, it's just only level of subatomic particle. But in the Madhyamaka, so every dhamma, sub-dhamma.
That's right. That's
so
right.
Here I have 2 questions. First question is, when somebody asks in quantum mechanical level, they say the subatomic particles are not intrinsic level, intrinsic nature. But how can prove? How can we confirm those people to explain this reality? This is the first question. The second question. Yes, first question is, I think, is right.
Maybe he should answer the first question.
I think what you said, namely that in quantum physics, we say, for instance, that microparticles have no intrinsic nature. It's true that it doesn't imply that other entities have no intrinsic nature, even though I insisted that human decisions and human minds may be a little bit similar. But, you know, what about macroscopic beings, namely tables and chairs and so on, the so-called classical macroscopic entities? It looks like they are solid. It looks like they have intrinsic features such as, for instance, their color, their resistance, and so on and so on. But in quantum physics, these properties of, you know, which are apparently intrinsic, are emerging from a level of behavior which is not at all intrinsic. And it can be showed that in that case, everything goes as if these things had intrinsic features, but only as if. Because, in fact, there is a non-zero probability that suddenly these properties disappear. Or there is a non-zero probability that these entities undergo the so-called tunnel effect, namely crossing a barrier of energy or a barrier of potential. So in fact, these entities are fundamentally behaving as quantum entities, but their you know, quantum behavior is so small that is usually not detected. So it's not true that they are solid. They are almost solid, I would say. For all practical purposes, they are solid, I would say. So in fact, according to quantum theory, this feature of non-intrinsicality of properties apply to all entities which appear to us.
Because why I ask you that some classical physicists, some of them strongly criticized or did argument with the quantum physicists.
Absolutely.
There's no empirical data. This is only very high-level mathematical formation. There's no empirical data. So that's why I ask you. It's a very problem to when we explain to those interested people. They ask. It's a very parallel with Buddhism and quantum mechanics, but we cannot explain. Just we say. We have teacher from Westerns. They taught me like this. We cannot explain like reasonably, logically. That's why I ask you. Thank you.
Well, first of all, of course, there are lots of empirical data about quantum physics, and Arthur will explain them to you. So these ideas are not just abstract or mathematical and so on. They are very well grounded into lots of experiments. Secondly, it's very striking what I showed you, namely the parallel between electrons and human decisions or human minds, I think can be used by Buddhist teachers because it shows quite well the reason of the parallel between Buddhism and quantum physics. The reason is very simple. It's not because, once again, human beings are similar.
More precise, Madhyamaka Buddhism.
Exactly, Madhyamaka. Yeah. Yes, that's right, yes. So this parallel is not by chance. It's because the two kinds of entities, namely electrons and human beings, have the same negative feature of having no intrinsic decision about what they will show. So it's quite similar, and it's not surprising that it's similar, not because they are similar, in fact, intrinsically, just because they have a negative feature in common. You know?
Thank you very much.
So I think it can be used. It can be used in your teaching.
I think it's a matter of reality that this session is over, and we go on to the next session. Thank you very much, Professor Bitbol.
That's okay.
Close.
Thank you, Professor Mukunda and Professor Michel Bilbao, for the wonderful session. I also request both of them to take their seats in the front row. Thank you. Moving on to the second session, I humbly request the speaker, Venerable Gishin Awan Sangela from Sera J Monastic University, and the chair of this session, Professor Gishin Awan Samdala, former Vice-chancellor of the Central University of Tibetan Studies, Sarnath, and the discussant for this session, Kishi Jamyang Tendarla from Drebung Gomang Monastic University, to grace us with their presence on the stage. Kishin Awan Sangela's talk will be on concerning Chittamatin's view of emptiness. I humbly request the chair, Professor Gishin Awan Samdala, to initiate the discussion. Thank you.
After hearing about the quantum mechanics, I would like to set the context of this presentation that Gishe Sangela is going to make. Buddhism, as you know, asserts the four kind of cardinal principles. Among them, the selflessness is of a very primary, matter. So, the selflessness is something in the philosophical context, something that Buddha has taught, which is not heard earlier and also has never been proposed by other philosophical schools in this globe. So all the Buddhist philosophical schools assert selflessness, of course. The main reason is behind this selflessness is, of course, related to not only the ontological systems, but also related to the soteriological and spiritual realizations to how we live and how we feel. And the appearance, particularly the appearance and the reality, the gap between the appearance and reality are primarily because of the appearance of self, and the reality is selflessness. That is what Buddha, proposes. So in Buddhism, we have so many schools, primarily 4 schools. Within them, there are sub-schools, and the 2 lower schools, the Vaibhashik school and the Sautrantric schools, they assert selflessness of person, but they assert, the external objects, the material objects, and the consciousness as something ultimately existing, something intrinsically, something independently existing. So without this, they think that Vaibhashika and Sautantrikas, they feel that without having this kind of intrinsic and substantial and independent existence of these material and consciousness, how can things work? They cannot work. They cannot, function. So, but if you look from the other schools, the upper schools, the Vijnanava, the Chittamatra, and the Madhyamaka, within Chittamatra there are sub-schools, and within Madhyamaka there are many sub-schools. The Chittamatra is in response to the Vaibhashika and the Sautrantika school, thinks that the external objects which are intrinsically and independently existent, which is proposed by the Sautrantika and Vaibhashika, it does not make sense. So therefore, to have this kind of external material and consciousness to be something ultimately and independently existing, that does not help us in reducing our negativities and and because this is not the reality of the life and reality of the world. So therefore, the Chittamatrin rejects the external world and rejects that everything that appears to us is the reflection of consciousness. So, but now it also Geshe Ngawa is going to explain how this makes how arguments the Chittamatrins make in order to advance its own argument and establish its theory of mind-only system. But you can understand that we have the conference on quantum mechanics and Buddhist Madhyamaka philosophy. But if you look from the Madhyamaka point of view, then again we find that the Chittamatrin school, which is the mind-only school, is falling into two extremes, in the sense that because it has not accepted even conventional existence of external object, material object, it falls into the extreme of nihilism. At the same time, but the consciousness, which is again asserted as something ultimately existent, is again, because of this, the Chittamatrin is falling into the extreme of reificationism. So therefore, if you look from the Madhyamaka point of view, then again, it fallacious, the philosophy is fallacious from so many points of views. And you can go in detail later that I personally find that the quantum mechanics as it is proposed is like Vijnanavadin Swatantrika Madhyamaka, which the Madhyamaka, which accepts kind of consciousness, the observer, and which the relation between the observed and the observer diminishes, and simply unlike the Chittamatrin, the physicists do not believe in the intrinsic things, as the scientist Bitbol has said, and at the same time there's no kind of they also assert external world. So if you go further into the Prasangika Madhyamaka, then everything is simply designated. There's nothing. Yes, two schools. The Swatantrika asserts, and within Swatantrika also there are two schools. But if you go into the realm of the Prasangika Madhyamaka, then everything is merely designated. There's not an iota of a thing that can exist, intrinsically. So right now, Geshe Ngawa Sangyela is going to, make the presentation on how Chittamatrins, propose and make arguments that external objects do not exist.
If you have difficulty remembering Geshe-la's name, you can call him the bold Geshe-la. Our unsurpassable refuge of all the Tibetans. With my due respect to you, Your Holiness, the champion of peace in the world, I would like to also greet all the scientists and Geshes and the students and other observers who have come here My greetings to everyone. My main topic is within the Buddhist philosophical system, there are the Mahayana and Hinayana philosophical systems within, and my one pertains to the former, and within it, there are the Madhyamaka and Chittamatra. So I would like to focus on the view of Chittamatra philosophy, perhaps to give a historical background it would be helpful. So during the time of the Buddha himself, except the introductory chapter of the Sandinimochana Sutra, rest of the chapters, the 9 chapters, give a very detailed account of the Chittamatra philosophical view. And similarly in Langaravatara Sutra and the Dasabhumi Sutra, as well as the Gandavaya Sutra, this is made clear. And then the Mahayana teachings declined at some point, and later on, Master Asanga pioneered in re-establishing the Chittamatra view, and particularly he wrote the Kuntu and Tegdu, which makes clear the Chittamatra view. And Master Jamyang Shepa also said, if you want to understand Chittamatra well, you need to study these 2 texts. So His Holiness wished to make some comments. So with regard to the teaching of the Four Noble Truths, which the Buddha taught, both the Pali tradition and the Sanskrit tradition, except for some differences with regard to the philosophical view, the Four Noble Truths teaching is something common to both the traditions. And within the Mahayana, the Sanskrit tradition of the teaching of the Buddha, the Prajaparamita Sutras, the Perfection and Wisdom teachings or sutras, which teach that everything is devoid of any essential existence or identity. And because there were people or beings who had difficulty taking that teaching literally, therefore, in the Sandinimochana Sutra, the Buddha said, I taught this, what I taught in this, the Prajaparamita Sutras with the view of the 3 naturelessnesses. So, of course, the teaching of the understanding of the selflessness, or which is taught in these sutras, are meant for overcoming our negative emotions. But for some, to say that everything is devoid of any essential existence gives some trouble. And therefore, instead, because we, in our own experience, we have negative emotions in relation to the sensual objects, such as the visual objects and sound and so forth. And therefore, for some disciples, to say that there is no external existence of anything, but that things are due to the imprints of our mind or reflection of our mind, is more suitable. And so, this is what the Chittamatra teaching says, or philosophical view says, and Master Asanga made the Chittamatra philosophical view very clear, and this will be clarified, made more clear by our bold Geshe-la. And so, following Master Asanga and Vasubandhu and so forth, Dignaga, Master Acharya Dignaga and Dharmakirti and so forth also have made these the philosophical view of Chittamatra clear. So I've written my conference paper, but I would not go into the details of whatever I've written, but I want to focus on few points.
First is that, according to Chittamatra, things have no external existence, and also that things are devoid of any duality of subject and object, and then that there is no referent object which is externally existent. And so these are the three shades of the philosophical view of Chittamatra. And so, with regard to the non-duality of subject and object, it is established on the basis of understanding that things have no external existence, and then the reasoning that is used to prove this thesis is that everything, the subject and object are simultaneous. And regarding the fact, the thesis in Chittamatra that these things are the reflection of our mind, or in the nature of our mind, there is this understanding that things are. This is because of the fact that the things are the reflection of our the imprints left on our mind, and then there is also the understanding that the teaching which says that there are the commonly accepted object and then uncommonly appearing objects to different beings. And Chittamatra says that things do not have any external existence, but they are mere reflection of the consciousness or the cognition which sees them, the consciousness. And the analogy that the Chittamatras give, the most important analogy is the our dream consciousness. So although we see things like elephants and so forth in our dreams, and just as the dream elephant, dream body and so forth do not have any external existence, but they are just mere reflections of our mind or consciousness, and therefore similarly the external physical forms and so forth are mere reflections of our mind and do not have any external existence. And in the summary of the Great Vehicle by Sangha, it says, like the past and so forth, so too the two, dreams and reflections, are not observed externally, because they are suitable to be observed as the substantial entity with the mind which apprehends them. So I have also written in my paper about what dream, the nature of dream is, what appears in our dreams, and so forth, but I'll not go into them. So according to Chittamatras, for example, when we see a blue color, the blue is within the nature of the mind, the entity of the consciousness or the cognition which sees it. So, because the consciousness and the blue, which is seen by that consciousness, come from the same substance, so the imprint which was left before becomes the cause for both the cognition of the blue and the blue color itself. The analogy is that is usually given is if we have a barley seed, it gives and when we sow that seed, we get harvest, the crops, and so all the grains that we get as a result of that one seed comes from that one seed. So similarly, when we see a blue color, there is the object which is seen and the cognition of blue, and both of these come from the same imprint. So with regard to the imprint, I think it is important for us to understand what that imprint actually refers to. So there are two types of imprints that we can talk about. One which actually happens while the cognition of blue color is happening, and the other is when the cognition has ceased to stop, it goes into an imprint form. So within these, out of these two, I think that it's not the later which goes into becomes the cause or the substantial cause of the blue color. Because in Chittamatra and Chittamatra philosophical texts, we learn that something which is not consciousness cannot become cannot become the substantial cause of consciousness as such. And similarly, because there is even within the physical things, one cannot become the substantial cause of another. And so, because of that, as Je Rinpoche, Master Tsongkhapa says in this quotation that Gisela just gives, that as the cognition of blue is about to cease, it leaves an imprint, and that imprint is actually the cause of that blue color. So my teacher, Khenso Rinpoche, also says that we have the imprints of apprehending or clinging or grasping at some true existence. And because of that, there is also the appearance of things as if they have some independent existence, and the cognition, when it sees, when it actually perceives that, and then it's about to go into seize, it leaves an imprint. And so that imprint is more difficult to overcome, and therefore it is termed also as the obscuration to knowledge. And the imprint of the previous grasping at true existence, once it has ceased, is easier to overcome. So, with regard to the substance being the same substance, is a reference to the imprint that is left when the cognition of blue is about to go out of existence or about to cease. So with regard, when Chittamatra said that everything is in the nature of the mind, what kind of mind or consciousness are we really talking about? So in our studies, we also learn about permanent objects or permanent phenomena, and any permanent phenomena must be contingent upon something which is a functioning thing, entity. And within the functioning entities, we have the forms and consciousness, and then some other things which are abstract things like impermanence and so forth. So although I have read many different texts, I didn't find any reference, but one reference is given in a scholar's writing. So with regard to this consciousness that we are talking about here, so when we say that the everything is in the nature of the mind or entity of the mind, in the case of a blue color, of course, we can say the cognition which sees that blue, the blue is with same nature, in same nature of that. Since the consciousness, the cognition of blue and blue color come from the same substance, all the qualities or properties of a blue color also have the same cause. So the impermanence, qualities like impermanence and some selflessness of the blue, all of these properties or qualities all of them are also in the nature of that cognition which sees the blue color. So this scholar uses the analogy of space or the uncompounded space. So uncompounded space is actually designated or imputed upon this empty space that we see. So when a cognition sees this empty space, that uncompounded space is also in the nature of that cognition. So when we look at the Chittamatra text, and when they say that everything is in the nature of the mind, it's not just the imprints that are left from the past, but there are cases where, due to concentration, and things can be talked about as being in the nature of the mind, and also because of the completion of the accumulation of merit and wisdom, we can also talk about things being in the nature of the mind. For example, with reference to highly realized beings, there are cases where the things are seen because of the purification of negativities within the mind stream of those highly realized beings as well. And then with regard to the common locus or commonly seen object or not, when two persons, let's call them Devadatta and Lhejin and Chöjin, so when they look at one thing, we can say there are the common objects which appear to them individually. What appears to one is not seen, does not appear to the other. So when they look at the one pot, for example, a vase or a blue color, so we may say that there is a pot or a blue object, blue color, which is the common object for both. But when we actually critically check, we can see that what actually appears to them individually, apart from what appears to them individually, which is where what one appears to one of them does not appear to the other, apart from these, we cannot have something out there which is called the common object. But the object, whether we talk about critically examining the object or without doing that kind of critical examination, according to the Chittamatras, there is nothing which exists externally And the blue color and the pot also are not the consciousness as such, although they are said to be in the nature of the consciousness or within that entity of the consciousness. Because otherwise, what we see in dream, the objects in dream would have to be said as the dream consciousness and so forth. And also, when someone's out of their visual, because of certain visual defects, sees some kind of a hair falling, I mean, those falling hairs would also have to be said as being the consciousness which sees them. And then there are cases where people are able to read others' minds. And when one, for example, someone called Devadatta sees or is able to read another's mind, then if everything is in the nature of the mind, then the person who has that clairvoyance to see the other person's mind, in that case, now the other person's the mind which he or she sees has to be in the nature of that the Devadatta's mind. And so there is this kind of argument. So in that case, it is the answer that is given is that when a clairvoyant person sees another person's mind, then the mind of the other person as per se is not seen, but some aspect, something which is akin to that person's mind is seen. So this, for example, if we dream of receiving 100 rupees, which would actually happen the next day, and the next day you receive 100 rupees from somebody. But what you have seen in the dream is not exactly the 100 rupees that you actually receive during the wake when you are awake, but some resemblance of the 100 rupees that you actually receive is seen in the dream. So likewise, when we see animals, for example, a dog, it is said that we are not able to actually see the body of the dog per se, but some resemblance of that dog's body is seen. Our visual cognition is said to see something which is similar to that dog's body and not the dog's body per se. And by using this kind of logic, in Shantideva's Bodhicharya Avatara, it is said that because when a hungry ghost, animals and gods, each according to their type, look at one thing, since their minds are different, therefore we as objects are not established. So when the cognition of the higher beings who have pure visions of things, when they see unpurified or beings, I mean, they are not able to see the beings, the body of the beings who are not enlightened per se, but some resemblance of the body is seen. So similarly, when a Buddha, it's said we say that the Buddhas see the true the appearance of true existence, which actually is to say that what appears to the sentient beings appear to the Buddha. And similarly, in Rinpoche's, he quotes a commentary by Tsumpa, which says that in dependence upon a stream of water through the force of ripening of their individual karma, hungry goats see it as a full purse and so forth. And when the disciples received teachings from the Buddha, what they hear is not exactly the voice of the Buddha, or they don't hear the voice of the Buddha per se, or nor do they see the Buddha's body per se, but some resemblance of the Buddha's voice and the body are seen by the disciples. And therefore, Rinpoche says that the two types of form bodies of the Buddhas as well as the voice of the Buddhas are in the nature of the disciples, or those to be tamed. So this has to be understood in this way. So because the Buddhas have completed the accumulation of merit and wisdom, they are able to see things differently than the sentient beings. So although there are different ways of saying this, and so we need to understand what is known as Rangnang and Shenang, which means what appears to oneself, as it appears to oneself, and what appears to one as it appears to others. In this way. So my main topic, focus here is the reasoning, which is the simultaneity of subject and object. I have here argued about the reasoning, the analogy, and the thesis. So there are many different interpretations of different scholars regarding this reasoning, which says that an object and subject are non-dual because of being simultaneously observed. So the example or analogy given is in the third chapter of the Pramanavartika. This reasoning is explained in detail. So simultaneity means that they happens at the same time, and mikpa or observation here should be understood in three different ways. Usually, mikpa or observed is interpreted as meaning realized, to realize or cognize, and so if we take this to mean something is realized, with regard to this word, so the cognition of blue and blue are simultaneous. So Migne can be understood in terms of realizing what is when the cognition of blue is realized, the blue is also realized, and when the blue color is realized, then the cognition of blue also is realized. Although in the example that we gave, that is used is that when one sees double moon, where there is one moon, there's the appearance of double moon, but there's no realization of double moon as such. So the cognition of blue and the blue color are simultaneously established, and then the self-cognition of the cognition of blue color is so they are realized. The blue and the cognition of blue are realized simultaneously, because the self-awareness of the cognition of blue is realizes that cognition of blue, and therefore it also together simultaneously realizes the cognition of blue, the blue color itself. So why is it necessary that it has to be same substance if these two things are simultaneous? It has to do with the relationship between the two things. So since if two things are simultaneously observed, then they have to be of the same essence or nature, and therefore they need to be of the same substance. So if two things are of different substances, then they could either have some connection or they could be completely disconnected. So when there is a relationship between these two things, and if they are causal, the relation is causal relation, then they cannot be of simultaneously established. And therefore, in this case, when we use the reasoning of simultaneity between the subject and object, they are simultaneous in the sense that they arise at the same time, and whenever one is realized, the other is also realized, and that is to mean observed. So Rinpoche says that blissful experience and the feeling and the consciousness which experiences it are also simultaneous. And then Kidub Rinpoche in his text on epistemology says that when someone sees double moon, the double moon and the cognition of the double moon are also simultaneous. So in the lower Tenet systems, when we say experience of bliss and the experience, the cognition which experiences or sees it are of one thing. So I would say that we have not much explanation for this. So if there were more time, I thought of also saying that according to Chittamatra, everything is in the nature of the mind, and that things are reflections, established due to the reflection of the consciousness. And they use the analogy of a dream. And so I would like to talk about dream. In the commentary and treatises of Indian masters, they say that they are saying that whether you talk about the what you see in the dream as the objects or the consciousness which dreams it, it's the same. And in Abhisamaya Alamkara also, when we are awake, if one meditates on, reflects on emptiness a lot, then one can also have dreams, meditating on the dreams. So usually, dream is taken as a false, as an analogy for this false or deceptive nature of things. But it seems that there are dreams where one can see truth. So within the dream, or sleep, for example, there is this sleep when all the sensory perceptions are withdrawn, and then another kind of sleep which is happens due to concentration. So within our own text, there are mentions of the higher realms of existence, like the form realm. It is said that the beings in the formless form realms also have dreams, and therefore those dreams must be understood in terms of being dreams due to the power of concentration, which is in fact mentioned by Tsongkhapa as well. And then there are those objects or things which are called Chögygechigesuk, or some objects which are merely objects of the mind. So they are unique objects of or forms, physical forms of the mind. So they are called so because they are very similar to what the forms or the physical things that we see with our own eyes. So there are forms which are just objects of our mind and not the sensory consciousness, and therefore we can understand what what is meant by everything being the.
Thank you very much, Kishi Mahasangela, for your very lucid and clear presentation about the Chittamata's very subtle views. Now I would like to invite some questions. Yes, please, Professor Bidbo.
Thank you very much for this talk. I was very struck by hearing you about the relations between the Chittamatra school of Buddhism and Western idealism, for instance, post-Kantian philosophy, and also phenomenology as created by the German philosopher Edmund Husserl. In this kind of philosophy, things are very different from the usual materialist view of the world. In the materialist view of the world, one tries to explain the emergence of consciousness and mind out of the workings of a material device called the brain. On the other hand, in phenomenology, things are exactly opposite. Namely, one tries to explain the belief that there are external material objects out of our experiences, our lived experiences. This is very similar to what you have explained about Chittamatra, in which we all see, we think we see the same object, but in fact we don't see the same object, and we try to explain why we believe we see the same object. So the similarities are so great between the two traditions that I wonder whether there would not be a very fruitful dialogue between Chittamatra and Western idealism, including phenomenology. Don't you think it would be a good idea to try this dialogue?
So it's your suggestion. Larry.
So in this Chittamatra view, the five objects such as form and so forth are said to be of the substance of consciousness, and that they say that there's nothing externally existing. So while saying that they are substance of the consciousness, there are people who also say that they are actually the consciousness, and then there are those who say that they are not the consciousness. So as far as I'm concerned, I think that since we can touch things, feel, and see, and so forth, therefore they are not consciousness. But because of the manifestation of the imprint of consciousness, they are said to be in the substance of the consciousness. For example, when we see a blue color, that consciousness or the cognition of blue leaves a very dense or thick imprint. And because of that, we also have a conception of the blue color. And so that conceptual mind also sees the blue, which is because of the imprint left by the previous cognition, the sensory cognition, seeing blue. And so when a conceptual mind sees, the conceptual mind seeing the blue color because of the manifestation of the blue imprint and the cognition which arises because of that imprint, they are two different things. And so, because things appear or because of that imprint manifesting, they are said to be of the substance.
Yeah. From a physicist's point of view, I had a question about how in your framework one distinguishes between two classes of objects that are subtly different. I take the example, because you talked about the blue color and the perception of color, I take the example of a rainbow. Now, the rainbow exists to us because it is a result of a very complex but subtle optical phenomenon, and each person perceives a different rainbow, even when we look at the rainbow itself, because it comes because of a set of optical phenomena. These are reflections and refractions that come to my eye. Same phenomenon does not reach the eyes of everybody who is perceiving it at the same time. So everybody perceives a different rainbow, and it is a completely visual phenomenon. It does not respond to any of our other senses. So if I was visually impaired, the rainbow does not exist. But we distinguish that from another class of phenomena in which there is an apple on the table, and everybody perceives the apple. Of course, we perceive the apple through different light. The same photons don't enter the eyes of everybody. So as you said, they have different perceptions. But of course, because the apple then responds to our other senses, I can go touch the apple, I can smell the apple, I can taste the apple. So I was wondering whether in your framework there's a difference between these two subtle phenomena, one of the rainbow and one of the apple.
So, as far as I'm concerned, according to Chittamatras, there are two different ways of seeing things. seeing things because of some temporary erroneous conditions. And in that case, it may be that someone sees something because of that kind of temporary conditioning, something good or bad. But on the contrary, if something is seen because of the deep seed, which is imprint left by from the past, because of the manifestation of this, somebody could see something, and there could be different ways of seeing things. For example, if someone sees an apple to be good or bad and so forth, then those, because of these deep seed, imprint, they should be as they appear to the persons. So, for example, in the temporary conditioning, there could be because of our grasping or desire, attachment, anger, and also because of some condition that affects our vision. And in the case of a rainbow also, because of the manifestation of these imprints, it could be seen as beautiful or whatever. And those things which arise as an imprint are said to be true.
How do you think of compassion? How do you think of compassion within the mind-only school? Is it possible to have true compassion?
So with regard to these ethical sides of the practice, such as compassion, loving kindness, and these are same. What is said by the Chittamatras are same as other philosophical schools also explain. So compassion is that wish to have for the sentient beings to be free from suffering, and loving kindness is this wish for others to have happiness. And so, regarding the suffering, the sentient beings have suffering because of the manifestation of their imprints, and because of that, we can have compassion towards them, wishing them out of those suffering.
What is, as you said that as per Chittamatra, the basis is what we dream, the dreams are the basis. So I'm saying, what is the difference between a glass of water seen in dream and a glass of water in front of me on table? Are they both same, or there is a difference? And the second thing is that if there is no observer, then as per the quantum theory, there is no phenomena, or there are phenomena happening even in the absence of observer also. That means there are corners of this universe. Or suppose if I see a glass, if I see something and 10 people are seeing a glass of water, and if I am no more in the world, still the rest 9 people are seeing the glass of water. So that means irrespective of whether one observer exists or multiple observers exist or no observer exists, the phenomena still occur. So is it still an observer-observed thing, or it is the phenomena do exist, do happen independently also?
So in dreams, when we drink a glass of water, and when we drink, and on the other hand, when we drink a glass of water when we are awake, there is difference between the two, because one can actually quench our thirst and the other cannot. But when 10 people looks at one glass of water, as I said earlier, when we critically analyze, then what is seen by one is not seen by the rest. So regarding this, there are lots of explanations in the Madhyamaka and Chittamatra view. So we can say that according to Chittamatra, there is a glass of water which is because of the imprint of all of us. So we can talk, even in the Chittamatra case, we can talk about there being earth, water, fire, and wind, and so forth, which are because of our collective karma. Whereas when you put a glass of water on a table, there are cases where some can see it and others cannot. And so this is because of whether the imprint is manifested or not, to see that. So if someone brings a glass of water on the table, you may drink it, or I may drink it. And when we leave the place, do we say that the water did not exist at all there? So because the water is there, we can talk about the water being there because of our manifestation of imprint. I mean, there's nothing wrong.
I think we are running out of time. We'll have a very quick question, please. One last question. Jawaharlal Suina.
If the same one thing will be seen by two same level of mindful person, then still it is impossible that things will be seen in differently. Is it quite impossible to that the two person will see a thing in the very same way?
So when 10 people look at this one object, then if the 10 people have the similar kind of imprint, then they will see similar objects. So it could be cases where people see the same, similar or dissimilar.
Sangela, very quick question. Dorduch, Jawaharlal.
So in the Madhyamaka view, things are merely in name, and while saying things are merely in name or labeled, designated, it is said that all the functionality of things are also visible. In Chittamatra, things are said to be mere reflection of mind, but while saying that, we also say form and so forth also exist. My question is, when we look at a food, for example, let's take the example of a dal and rice. One person may see it as a very delicious, whereas another person may see it very delicious. So the difference in these two persons' views, because of their liking or disliking, will that actually affect the food itself? The one person seeing it as very tasteful or delicious, does he make the food more delicious? Whereas the other person sees it as not delicious. I mean, does that impression make the food undelicious? So as I said earlier, there are ways of seeing things because of temporary erroneous conditions and also because of the deep imprints. So here, these two persons, if what they see are because of the imprints of their mind manifesting, and so for the one who sees the food as delicious, because of his imprint, his or her imprint, which sees that as delicious, that makes actually, the imprint makes it more delicious. Whereas for the other person, if the food is not delicious, then that imprint also affects the food. So if the Chittamatras were 100% true, then Madhyamakas do not need to object. So as far as I'm concerned, I would say that there is the philosophical, falls in the philosophy itself of Chittamatra.
From Professor Bob.
Very good question. Thank you for the wonderful presentation of Simzamba, which I couldn't completely follow, but really, really powerful. And I just thought you might have an answer to something I've always wondered, that the school that Chidendu Madraba, Chitube Shunglulia, ni jajin juju, so in other words, the deeds and action is connected, bodhisattva action is connected to a school when there are no external objects. And why is that the assignment? Is there a reason for that assignment? You know, Pagma Tomela Soba, ni jajin juju, so any children do much over any lehajiak same chilola and the neighbor. Why is that equal? That's the question. If you haven't thought about that.
La. Semsamelula, Gachichugu.
Why that's the one that's the extensive deeds. You know, the Semsambi school is the one that's assigned with Asanga, the lineage of the extensive deeds. Like the Nagarjuna side is the deep view, and this one is extensive deeds. So action, what is that? The action is connected to the mind-only school. Is there a reason?
So when we talk about the extensive deed lineage and the profound view lineage, the differentiation here is not because of the philosophical view, but because of the skillful means. So when the skillful means is more emphasized, then the lineage is called the extensive lineage of bodhisattva deeds. And so Asanga and Master Asanga and so forth are attributed, the extensive lineage is attributed to this lineage, whereas the profound lineage comes from Master Nagarjuna and so forth. So they have to do with the skillful means. The difference has to do with the skillful means and emphasizing whether the skillful means or the view.
Okay. Now we are going to close this session. Your Holiness, for your very graceful presence, and the presenter Kishi Sangyala, and the eminent scientists and philosophers, and the participants. I'm very thankful to all of you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kishi Ngawan Samtenla and Kishi Ngawan Sangyala, for a highly enriching session. Next, we will have a lunch break for 45 minutes, returning sharply at 1:15 p.m. Please remain seated, as well as please leave the radios in your seats before going for lunch. Thank you.